Hey everybody, Bryn here, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be playing a Dragon Sicilian, continuing our run all the way to 2000. So they played d3 early, and generally whenever they play something other than the main line of d4, we're still happy to go into lines with g6 and bishop g7. So I don't think we have anything to worry about here. So they're playing a delayed Alpin. Which I think is fine. So we can either play knight f6, provoke e5, or we can play d6 first. I like d6, because it also has in mind ideas of bishop g4. Let's go knight f6. I'm looking at bishop g4 and taking. I don't think we've done something like this before, but it's something I want to keep in the cards. And this is being mentioned mainly because there's a similar well, now it's completely separate, but you can kind of treat some Dragon Sicilians like, how do I put this, like a Benoni, essentially, where there are a lot of pieces that fight for this d7 square, so trading one or two of them off isn't really the worst thing. And actually, because of that, it's nice to sometimes trade, and that's why I'm looking at this move knight e4. But the problem is they just move back, and all of a sudden I've wasted a little bit of time. I could play knight to d5 instead, kicking the knight, hopefully. It's very unlikely that they will play d4. I think knight d5 is good, because once they move away, then I can develop and things are a bit easier to play. So I'll start with knight d5, attacking the knight. And the good thing is it prevents bishop f4. So now I'll just continue my development here with knight c6 and maybe bishop g4. Okay, so they prevent it, which I think is very reasonable. But I'm going to play this like a reverse Maroczy where we have fianchettoed, interestingly enough. So I could try knight f4, but I think their intention here, actually I'm not quite sure what their intention is. Let's just play bishop e6. This is the normal standard setup. Okay. If they're going to provoke me into playing f5, I think it's not a bad idea to just do it. So let's do it. And queen d7. And I think it's fair to say that we have a very comfortable position. This knight's a little awkward. It wishes it could have gone to like g5, for example. Those were things I was more so concerned about. That's why here I was a bit hesitant to bring the bishop to e6 because of knight g5. And I didn't want to play something like f6. But now all of a sudden it's completely justified to play moves like f5. Because, well, their pieces are a little bit less coordinated. I'm going to bring this rook off of this long diagonal. Whenever you see pieces like this, it's not going to be an issue in the long run. Or not maybe immediately, but in the long run it could be. So I'm looking at rook a8 or rook a d8. It just depends on if I want a rook on the e file or d file. I think I'm going to bring it to d8 instead to attack this guy in a move or two. For example, with knight c7, attacking this pawn, they could end up just losing it. And the reason why I wanted to play this is because I want to play a move like b6. And all of a sudden, when I play b6, there's no issue on this long diagonal. It made sense to keep it there, but it also makes sense that what they're doing, they're trying to bring their knight back into the game. So this is kind of reminiscent of some sort of King's Indian. I'm looking at knight f4. I also don't hate f4, which is kind of a funny move, with the idea of bishop f5. But I think I should start with knight c7 regardless. Just bringing the knight back. So I could have also brought it to f6 or e7. I thought it'd be nice to bring it here, though. And this looks like a mistake. So if I play f4 and then bishop to f5, it looks like that pawn might just drop. Also f4, I'm wondering if I can take. That's a bit messy though. So f4, bishop d2, I take, takes, queen takes. There's bishop g4, queen h4, and then queen f3, defending everything way too soon. So I think that's off the cards. But instead what I could do is I can probe. And a way to probe here is queen f7, which all of a sudden threatens a2. If they end up going knight f3, threatening knight g5, I'll just go h6, queen d2 to add pressure. I can go king h7. The important part is that I have e4 as another threat. So not just attacking a2. I also wanted to have the threat of, threatening e4 and trying to force some exchanges there. So here, I think it's very good to just take this pawn. But I have to be careful. Wow, I have to be careful. So if I take, they can actually sacrifice the exchange and try something like d4, where all of a sudden they have bishop c4 threats. And I want to be careful about that. So d4 in that position, I could go knight to a5. That does look like it solves everything. So it takes on a2, they sacrifice the exchange and everything, d4, and then I just go knight to a5 to protect c4. I think we'll do it, and then bishop to b3. Uh-oh. No, I think we're okay, right? Just knight b4? For a second, I thought I was not okay, but I think we're still okay, right? If they move forward, then I can play e4. If not, then I can play moves like bishop to b3 and slowly try to maneuver my way out. Yeah, so I think e4 here is actually very annoying for them. There's two questions. If they play d4 or if they move away. If they move away, they'd have to go to, I think, d2, but then we can just take on d3. Yeah, like here, I think we can just take on d3. So let's do that. And then we also have f4 as well. So here we don't have to play f4. We're just going to take on d3. This guy is like weirdly perfectly defended. So after queen e2, we should be a little careful because rook takes a2 as a threat. So we're just going to defend everything with rook to d8 here. Bishop g5, I'm thinking just rook d7. There's also bishop f6. I don't mind that either. But I would love to play f4, specifically, to see where this bishop's going. It does have some good square. Bishop c1, I think, is actually the only good square. Bishop d2, of course, isn't good. But if they go back to c1, it's just very passive. And I think that is a benefit to me. So I can just take on c4 here first. Is there anything better? So taking on d1 first, and then taking on d1 again. Queen takes, I take on c4. At the end, there's actually this queen e8 check. Or queen d8 check. And I can't actually save that knight. So I think if I want to save my bishop... Well, not save it. It's more like I want to make sure I don't lose it. Or at least just I get it out. So I think now's the time to try and get that piece out. Okay, so I'll just take like this. And I have knight e6. So they're going to go queen d2 probably. And then knight e6 will defend everything. Okay. Yeah, good game. That was a really, really, really cool one, actually. I'm quite fond of it. Let's look at this in the analysis, shall we? All right. So, again, yeah, whenever you're dealing with most sidelines, the dragon setup is actually going to be very, very effective against most of them. I would say, again, the only alternative thing to worry about is any c3 Sicilians, where now g6 is going to give you a little bit more of a problem. As you can see, the engine kind of like, whoop, it's not a big fan because of this, after this move d4, what you have to deal with is this huge center, and this bishop's kind of shut out. That's the important part, is since it's shut out, you end up having some problems here activating that bishop, as long as they can maintain this pawn on d4 here. So they'll usually go knight f3, prevent any bishop g4s by going h3 at some point, and so on. So d3, even if they go for some sort of like c3, d4 stuff, we don't really have to worry, and already engine favors us. I thought g6 was a good way to play. Maybe knight c6 or knight f6 was better first, but I really don't care. We're going for these similar setups each time. And again, so they're going for like a delayed Alapin or a slower one, but as you can see, because we have gained so much time, it's not as effective, and that's important to know. So d6 was a bit slow. It says knight f6, which was something I mentioned. You know what I didn't think of was d5. This is something I sometimes struggle to do, even though this does look very, very effective here. But all right, let's just go to the important parts and not get caught up too much. So they wasted some time by making this trade, and they just end up in a worse position because, well, they didn't really get an effective setup by preventing us from doing certain things we might have wanted to do, which you can sometimes see from the normal dragon. So yeah, knight to d5. And the thing is, again, if they castled long, then they'd have moves like h4, h5, and they can attack our kingside, which is the most effective thing to worry about as black. That's something we have to be scared of. But we do get sufficient counterplay on the queen side here, where they generally should castle. But here we have a lot of advantages that we can fight for. So h3 is a reasonable move to prevent bishop g4. This is one of our potential ideas. You can see this in like some perk setups, for example. And this isn't far off from a perk, since we have a fianchettoed bishop. But most importantly, because of this, now we can go for some sort of reverse Maroczy, where instead of the bishop being on e7, it's on g7. And I think this is actually a better bishop for it. Because it helps reinforce e5 instead of c5. e5 is more likely to be weaker in these types of Sicilian positions here, unless we play f6. But now we don't have to play f6. We can just maintain our kingside as is, or we can go even more aggressive and play for like f5, e4, or f5, f4. And yeah, we just get a nice position. So again, knight h2, bishop e6 is all of a sudden justified. And again, f5 is justified here. I don't think it makes any sense to trade and release some of the pressure. Like if you compare the bishops, which one's better? I think it's clear that our bishop is better than theirs. And we actually have a space advantage because of our Maroczy bind setup. We have pawns on our 4th rank, whereas they only have pawns on their 3rd. Doesn't mean that they don't have good potential for their pieces. Of course, a lot of people will play this with the black pieces, this type of setup. So that's something to keep in mind. But here it just it doesn't quite work out so well. And yeah, queen d7. And of course, we just bring our pieces to normal squares, reinforce our pawn structure, and we just have a nice advantage. And we don't really have to push too much for anything. Here, actually, f4 is mentioned. And I was thinking of f4 with the idea of bishop f5, but I wasn't sure about queen b3 and then like rook d1 or something. But it says knight a5. The queen has to go back to c2, and then c4 is actually a huge problem for them, which is definitely something that I clearly missed. I didn't think it was going to be so bad for us, but I didn't realize it was going to be that good. So that's why I went a little bit slower here with queen f7 here, threatening a2. And yeah, actually it turns out we can take it. So what I was worried about here is rook takes a2, which is actually the second best move. It says knight c4 is the best one, which is what I was expecting to be played, because then they can at least get one of the bishops off. But here, after rook takes a2, takes, and then d4, which is definitely their best bet to try to make things messy, we can easily find ourselves messing up here with something like taking on d4. Supposedly, this is actually not so bad. After bishop c4, we can just take, and then take on e3, I guess. Yeah, and funnily enough, we're not even that much worse, but of course, you don't want to do that. Instead here, knight to a5 is what I found, and that's why I ended up taking on a2. You always want to calculate these things ahead of time, instead of just saying, oh, they have d4 and I have to end the line there. No, calculate 1 or 2 moves further, and you see knight a5 prevents bishop c4, and it's not like they get anything substantial with this move, d4. They can take on c5 and everything, but we can either retreat or play something like knight to d5 and go for some activity here. Which I think is actually extremely important, because when we look at it, we are up in exchange. So even if they get a pawn like the c5 pawn, it's not actually that big of a deal. Even if they take on b6 here, we can just take on e3 and then back on b6, and we're still up the exchange. So there's nothing really to worry about, which I think is very important and good. Good to know, despite them getting a pawn back, by the way, because we did take on a2 originally. I think that's going to cover it this time. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye-bye.